Speaker in the Assembly, which is also then the authority of the House. It is probable that in Britain, when the King first appointed a Sergeant-at-Arms to attend upon or to accompany the Speaker, a mace went with him as the symbol of the royal authority delegated to the Speaker. The Sergeant-at-Arms brings in the mace at the beginning of each day's proceedings, and it must be in place when the Speaker is in his or her chair. The procession on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is from the main doors up in front of the government front benches, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the procession goes in on the opposition side of the House.
We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
For Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce the bill number 232, being an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill is introduced to address the situation in the community, and as a precautionary measure that to be written into the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act will prevent people from accepting guarantees unless they have a perfect understanding of what's expected of them.
The honourable member for Calgary-McCall has moved first reading of Bill 232, an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 232, an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly copies of the Alberta Registered Dietitians Association annual report for the year 1986-87. I'd also like to table a copy of the annual report of the Alberta Association of Registered Nurses for the year ending September 30th, 1987. As well, Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report of the committee chaired by the honourable member for Cypress, the Alberta Health Facilities Review Committee, annual report for the year 1987.
Deputy Premier.
I'd like to table a report required by statute, the annual report of Medicine Hat College.
Member for Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the annual report of the Alberta Research Council for 1987.
Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the 1986-87 annual report, Alberta Petroleum Incentive Program Fund.
Member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly this morning the fourth annual report of the Advisory Committee on Heavy Oil and Oil Sands Development.
Introduction of special guests.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to, as the member of the legislature for Medicine Hat, introduce 28 young and interested Albertans from Medicine Hat and southeastern Alberta. This group of 28 young people are here for the weekend to join with other members of the Progressive Conservative Party in the annual convention, and they represent university, college, and high school students who are taking a very active interest in the political life of this province, and I would ask that all honourable members join me in demonstrating a warm welcome to this fine group of young people. Please rise and be seated. Welcome to the Assembly.
Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure this morning to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 22 grade 8 students from Sir John Thompson School located in the Calder constituency. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Bob Krazak, and classroom aide, Judy Hickey. They're in the public gallery, and I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased this morning to introduce to you and to the other members of the Assembly some 50 grade 5 and 6 students from the Ellerslie Elementary Junior High School in the constituency of Edmonton Millwoods. They're in the public gallery accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Phyllis Olson and Mrs. Elaine Bartz. I'd ask them to please rise now and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
See who's over there. Oh. Mr. Speaker, I'd like, to direct the first question to the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs wrote his superiors in April 1984 urgently requesting a meeting with the Minister regarding the safety and security of funds on deposit by first investors and associated investors. Now, Mr. Speaker, in view of the collapse of these companies and the losses suffered by innocent Albertans, has the government, this present government, bothered to determine whether the government followed up on this request? Obviously, they did nothing about it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised at that question. I thought the Premier explained very clearly yesterday that the reason for the inquiry, which is underway now and going into great detail, taking many, many weeks, involving hundreds of people, is to get at the exact answers to those kinds of questions. Not only that, but all the others associated with this matter.
This is now a public document. We're talking about this government, Mr. Speaker. We're not talking about the code inquiry. Maybe I'll direct the second question to the Minister for Consumer and Corporate Affairs. And as part of the submission at that time, Mr. Dyer stated, and I quote, "In my view, the company does not meet the capital requirements under the Investment Contracts Act, and there exists a state of affairs that is or may be prejudicial to the interests of its investment contract holders." My question, does the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs agree with the assessment of the Assistant Deputy Minister?
Mr. Speaker, there are two objections that one can make to the questions being raised by the Leader of the official opposition. One is that the questions he's asking me precede the date that I took responsibilities for this portfolio. But the more serious one is he is anticipating questions that are being examined in a judicial inquiry, and that is not a rule of the House.
The questions along this line were happening 2 days ago, and there's a real concern once again about matters being raised that are indeed before the code inquiry, and we've had the direction of the House in that regard before. And as a matter of fact, at one stage of the game 2 days ago, Standing Order 23 subsection G was indeed violated, in the opinion of the Chair, by the member for Westlock Sturgeon. When a statement was made, it is obvious the government is at fault. Once again, we have to come back to the fact that the matter is clearly sub judice, and a minister may only has the opportunity to stand and to make that comment and make no additional comment. Because once again, we go back to the tradition and the observance of this House, which is clearly there in precedent, but it goes back to May of '78, where Speaker Amarongan made these comments, and I think that all of us do need to bear them in mind. Not only should questions and answers and debate in this House avoid the appearance of influencing judicial proceedings, they should also not be used as a means of getting information which could conceivably be useful in those proceedings. The procedures of the courts or quasi-judicial bodies are designed for getting all the information necessary for those proceedings, and it would not be proper to use the question period as a sort of adjunct or an aid in regard to court proceedings. Please bear that in mind. And the chair also instructs the table to add 3 minutes to question period, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will come back. I'm going to ask these questions. They don't have to answer them. I accept that. But certainly we have the right to answer. This is a public document. If they want to hide behind it, go ahead. Mr. Speaker, my question then to the same minister then, Mr. Speaker, it says, he also said, and I quote, administrative acts relating to financial institutions must ensure that proper valuations are used. Feeling this, more and more investors place money with the company when they shouldn't. My question is, does this minister deny, on part of the government, that this is exactly what happened, that thousands of investors were led down the garden path because someone at the political level...
Order, please, order. The responsibility lies on the questioner as well as the one making the response. Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the questions that the leader is irresponsibly raising are the very questions that Code is inquiring into in the inquiry. It would be irresponsible for me, as it is irresponsible for him, to delve into the subject that is being judicially inquired into, for the very reasons that you mentioned a moment ago, and that is, A, to anticipate a decision, and B, perhaps to influence the course of a judicial inquiry. It is simply not part of the rules of this House, nor has it been the part of the House of Commons tradition.
Minister, supplementary last, please.
Mr. Speaker, he goes on to say, and I'll direct this back to the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker, that should this company fail, the effect on the confidence of financial institutions would be in Alberta would be serious. This is a public document. My question to the Deputy Premier, does he not agree that this cozy relationship between the Cormys and the Cabinet led to thousands of innocent Albertans losing their life savings?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can only repeat what has been said so often. Those documents, the thousands of documents associated with this entire case, are being examined by lawyers representing all the groups. The proceedings are televised. The people of Alberta can see it every night. There's nothing to hide. The government was the one that initiated this inquiry to make sure that all those facts, doubts, questions are fully answered and done so in a public way, and we have nothing to hide.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition. Second main question.
Expected my friend to jump in, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to designate the second question to the member from Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, in the last few days, Albertans got treated to the news that after about a year, well, nearly a year of vacancy, the Minister of Agriculture in Alberta finally decided to appoint his former backbench buddy from the House of Commons, and I think his former roommate, to a fairly senior position within the Department of Agriculture. Will the minister explain why it is that he was able to wait for nearly a year before filling this important vacancy?
Mr. Speaker, as all departments did, we went through a process of trying to increase efficiencies within our departmental aspects as we went through a budgetary deficit reduction process. For that reason, we were analyzing as to whether we could combine this with the economic branch of our department. We recognize the importance of the Planning Secretariat so that we can be forward-looking in addressing the difficulties of the agricultural sector, especially at this time when we do face somewhat of a financial crisis. And because of the superb qualifications of this individual, I'm delighted that he has accepted to come on and help us confronting the difficulties that we are facing in the agricultural community.
Nice try. He says, oh, the position was redundant for a year, but now it's time. Will the minister tell all Albertans why 113,000 unemployed Albertans and everybody else in Alberta didn't have a crack at applying for that job? Will he explain that?
Mr. Speaker, I indicated, and I recognize that the NDP is very good at twisting the truth, and they work on the philosophy that if they tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. But I should share with the honourable member, as I indicated to the press, if somebody was interested in that job, we were open to receiving their recommendations as it related to that specific position. The honourable member says they didn't know it was empty. She just said it was empty for a year. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted. If Mr. Schellenberger had the qualifications of the members opposite, I would understand their concern, but since his qualifications are so much superior...
I won't even bother responding to that stuff. Mr. Speaker, I see as of yesterday that the Department of Environment now has a vacancy at a senior position for the Environment Council of Alberta. Will the Environment Minister now commit himself to properly posting that job instead of waiting for a year without posting it and giving it to one of his cronies?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make it publicly known that effective April 22, the Chief Executive Officer of the Environment Council of Alberta will be leaving Alberta to take a very significant position with the Government of Pakistan. And I, with regret, a number of weeks ago, accepted the resignation of Mr. Kurar. And I know that all of us would want to congratulate Mr. Kurar for accepting this international responsibility, and I know that the knowledge that he's gathered and here in the province of Alberta dealing with environmental matters would be of great benefit to the people of the Government of Pakistan. There is a terms of reference that we followed in terms of selecting officials associated with Alberta Environment, and we'll be following a process, a similar process in the upcoming weeks, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the process is order in council, which doesn't require public posting. All right, final supplementary. We'll go back to the Minister of Agriculture here. Is it now the government policy? Well, given the likelihood that there's going to be a few more unemployed Conservative MPs in the coming months, is it now his policy? Is it now the minister's policy and the government policy to arbitrarily hold senior positions and just appoint their Tory cronies to them?
No, Mr. Speaker. I should indicate, though, in fairness, and I can understand the concern of the honourable member when one looks at what the New Democratic Party has done consistently the few times that they have assumed positions of authority throughout our country and the way they've treated the individuals that were employed within the public service. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to follow that sad example. We have an excess of 1,000 people. Mr. Speaker, they ask a question, but they don't want the answer. I should indicate to them this appointment has been enthusiastically endorsed by senior people within the department. We have... Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry they don't want the answer. They're shutting me down.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture, I wonder if the Minister of Agriculture could tell us how we know for certain, beyond his statement of opinion, how do we know for certain that we have received the best candidate for this position if we haven't had an open competition for that position?
His memory like you did.
Mr. Speaker, I just indicated to the New Democratic Party, and I'm happy to reinforce it for the honourable member from the Liberal Party, that if an individual is interested in this position, as I indicated to the press, it's received such wide publicity to date, if they would indicate that to me. I've always worked on the basis, and I'm going to continue to work on the basis of an open-door policy if there is concerns. And I must say, in all honesty, we haven't had that concern relayed to us by anybody other than the opposition and the media. And I can...
Member for Clover Bar, followed by Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, at the time that the Deputy Premier, the Honourable Dr. Horner, was in the House, he said, "Do you really think that I would appoint someone from another political party to a sensitive position like this?" Does the Minister still go along with that philosophy, that he would not appoint someone?
If you're looking for a job, you have to retire.
Recognizing the wisdom that the honourable member for Clover Bar has consistently displayed in the House, I will take his recommendations under consideration.
Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the Minister, could you clarify the role of Mr. Schellenberger in planning the future of the expanding agricultural industry, such as going on in the red meat sector at the present time?
Yes, Mr. Schellenberger's assistance in our planning secretariat is going to be very crucial as we go through negotiations with the federal government, because as the honourable member has underscored, it is so important, and the New Democratic Party itself endorsed this in their alternate throne speech, whereby we have to work with the federal government on a very close basis. And Mr. Schellenberger is going to contribute to that because he has been a member, an outstanding member in Canada's Parliament for over 15 years, and his service will be very valuable. I should stress that it is on the record also, this gentleman is a professional agrologist. He has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Alberta in agriculture. He's worked very closely with the agricultural community, and I'm happy that he has accepted this position.
Main question, member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General and Minister in charge of federal and intergovernmental affairs. Mr. Speaker, as you probably know, Mr. Bourassa, one of that expanding family of Liberal premiers, will be visiting the province next week. And consequently, there will be, I'm sure, some discussions on the use of French, and in particular in this post-Meech Lake Accord, where the Premier and the Attorney General have talked about offering trials in both official languages and draft future statutes in both languages, and the use of French in the legislature, all parts of the Meech Lake Accord. First question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Attorney General. Will he be able to assure Mr. Bourassa that he will be following the lead of Saskatchewan, at least in as far as the fact that French will be allowed in the legislature, provided by translations supplied and without the permission of the Speaker being required?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me say that the visit Premier Bourassa to Alberta has been under planning now for several weeks, and is not associated in any way with the most recent decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, to which the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has referred. There is an agenda, of course, which has already been discussed with the officials from the Government of Quebec, who, as you know, have an office in Edmonton, and that agenda includes a number of items relating to our close relationships with the province of Quebec. I may say that if discussions do take place with respect to language issues, they will be done in the context of a clear recognition that Alberta legislators will legislate for Alberta. Alberta has never taken, as a government, taken a position relative to what Quebec should do with respect to their language legislation, and we expect that that position will be the same relative to Quebec's position to Alberta. I should say, to be specific with regard to the question about language in the Assembly, it is obvious that, as I've said outside the House, the Meech Lake matter, of course, will have to be kept in mind. The Mercure decision, as it affects Saskatchewan, is something we are reviewing now, and it will be decided within this chamber by all members as to whether or not we make changes relative to the standing orders. But as yet, the government has not taken a position specifically with respect to those rules, but in due course it will be coming before the Assembly during the course of this sitting.
Mr. Speaker, it suggests it's about time to start taking a position. Would he be able to assure the House that he's going to establish the right of French language trials in Alberta, which is already practical now? Would he go that far?
French language trials, of course, are taking place in Alberta in the criminal courts when requested, although it is a matter of, as the honourable member will appreciate, some difficulty in obtaining, in some locations, jurors in jury trials, but it has been done. We will continue that practice. In the meantime, of course, the Supreme Court decision in Mercure indicated that the provision of translation services, as is now being done, for people who do not speak English, either French or other languages, is a satisfactory method of dealing with civil trial matters. And that, of course, will continue to be done and has been successfully done over the long history of this province.
Mr. Speaker, I think what we like is that as a right, not just as a privilege, but go on a bit further. Is the minister aware that there is a great deal of federal assistance available from Ottawa to translate our future laws into both French and English, and will he be taking advantage of that?
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of any federal assistance being made available to the province of Alberta at this stage. There have been reports that that might be the case, but in fact there have been no there's been no official advice to me to that effect.
Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed that he's not aware that there is French, there is ability. Would he not then undertake to correspond with, as he said the other day, Mr. Speaker, there was nobody in the federal government, thank God, that corresponded to his position, but who is close to it? Would he undertake to correspond on behalf of the legislature to find out what assistance there is available from the federal government to translate our future statutes into both French and English?
Well, the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, I must correct him when he says that I indicated to the Assembly that there's nobody in the federal government in an equivalent position. What I said was that there is no position in the government of Alberta that deals with the subject of delivering the mail. That is quite a different issue. There is indeed a minister responsible for federal and provincial relations. His name is Senator Lowell Murray, and he is planning a visit to Alberta within a matter of days, and we will have an agenda on which we will discuss a number of issues, and the one raised by the honourable member will be one of those on the agenda.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to either the Attorney General or the Government House Leader, will the government consider striking an all-party committee to actually draft the legislation prior to introduction in the Assembly?
The government will continue to carry out its responsibilities to bring forward government legislation.
Member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister indicated that there was consideration with regards to the cost of this translation. Has the minister made any estimates of that that we would be aware of, or will estimates be done?
Mr. Speaker, we have not made any estimates at this stage. We have been advised, however, that the cost to Manitoba to date in their translation process, as required because of a decision of the Supreme Court of Canada relating to Manitoba, has been in the neighbourhood of $15 million, and they're not finished yet. In terms of translating past the honourable member from Mountain View and the honourable Leader of the Liberal Party continue their loud noises, and that's all they are. I would like to respond, however, by saying to the honourable member for Little Bow that those costs associated with Manitoba related to translation of past statutes, and there is, of course, an ongoing cost which would be associated with the translation of any current statutes or new statutes, and no estimates have yet been made as to what that might be, but of course there would be costs associated with that matter.
Member for Little Bow, Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Calgary Northwest, then Vegreville, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Speaker, I would like to address my question to the Honourable Minister of Energy, and this has to do with the $3 million that AOSTRA has invested in an experimental oil sands extraction process in conjunction, Shell in conjunction with Solvex. This project has been abandoned, Mr. Minister. Is the Minister in a position to indicate what we as Albertans received for our $3 million in this joint project?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Solvex Corporation entered into an agreement with Shell Canada to test this process out in its Albuquerque plant. When I say its Albuquerque plant, it would be Solvex Albuquerque plant. to see whether or not the solvent technology would be one which would be appropriate for Shell to develop its leases in the oil sands area. There were, if I remember correctly, some $6 million expended on the project, and with Aostra contributing approximately $3 million, as the honourable member has indicated. As the honourable member knows, Aostra enters into a number of agreements with companies to test oil sands and in situ projects. And the purpose of the experiment was to see whether or not this particular process would be economic. Solvex, or Shell rather, concluded that it was not an economic process for them to proceed to enter into a pilot demonstration plan on their lease in Fort McMurray. However, the Solvex Corporation has approached the provincial government to look at the possibility of Solvex Corporation proceeding to develop their own technology in a pilot project in the Fort McMurray area.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, Aostra has also committed a 30% loan guarantee. Can the Minister indicate what the status of that loan guarantee can be in light of the fact that Shell has bought their way out of the joint project?
If I recall correctly again, Mr. Speaker, and I maybe have to check and get back to the honourable member, but Shell and Solvex were having discussions with our Department of Energy as a number of projects are being discussed with our department, and they were looking at some form of a Crown agreement should the pilot project work out to Shell's satisfaction, work out some agreement whereby the government and Aostra would participate with Shell in that pilot project. The agreement was never signed. It was one where the department had discussed the principles and the terms with Solvex and Shell, but my understanding is now that there is no agreement in place, and thus it stops there.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. In light of the fact that Shell Canada spent $1 million to get out of the project, can the Minister indicate if he's had any discussion with the Shell people as to why they backed out of the project?
I haven't had any personal discussions with Shell on this, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, received the press release, as honourable member probably did as well, where they indicated the Shell settlement of $1 million with Solvex, and that Solvex would be proceeding to have discussions with the province on possible lease development in the old Bitumont plant downstream from Fort McMurray. But the conclusion, as I understand it, and Aostra would have further information, is that simply that in Shell's view, the project was not economic for them to pursue the developments on their lease.
Supplementary, Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by the member for Redwater Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to a similar project, would the minister tell the Assembly how much money Alberta Oil Sands Equity has committed to the Oslo project?
It's a long ways from Solvex, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to respond further in estimates to that. The Alberta Oil Sands Equity Group are a partner with the other 5 companies that are involved with the Oslo proposal. And to this stage, we've had discussions about the terms of a possible agreement, and there haven't been any conclusions there yet. However, the budget would reflect an increase in the budget in the monies for the Oil Sands Equity Group for the coming year to do some field work which took place this winter, but I'd be happy to discuss that further in the estimates.
For Redwater Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the supplementary to the Minister of Energy. Has Aostra gained any technological information on this project which would help the recovery of heavy oil in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess the question can always be raised, and it's always a valid one, as to how much We learn from experiments that don't work out the way you'd like them to work out, and that's the nature of AOSTRA's investments, to work with the private sector to try to develop new technologies. An attempt was made in this particular case to develop this technology, and it's not been to the satisfaction of Shell. However, that doesn't mean that's the end of that technology. And I would speculate that AOSTRA and Shell have learned a great deal from this particular pilot project and would take the results into account in considering any further work in that area.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental to the minister, part of its praise for a change, Mr. Speaker, in Solvex is a small company is trying to move into what this government has left open only to the major companies for some time. Is the minister now thinking about maybe opening up, as many other countries do around the world, at least 20 to 25% participation in these new major projects in oil development to small Alberta Canadian companies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a valid question, and one in which we would love to see smaller companies participate in oil sands development, and that's why we've had considerable work done in looking at the concept of a regional upgrader, whereby smaller companies could get into leases and do the mining and extraction and move that or over to a regional upgrader. And work is continuing on in that regard to see the feasibility and the possibilities of that with respect to smaller companies. Because the honourable member knows there are many small companies, not just oil companies, but mining companies as well, that are interested in this. The proposals that we have before us right now that we're actively negotiating do involve the larger companies. And really, Mr. Speaker, it's difficult for a small company to raise the capital that's required for these projects. With the Oslo proposal, for example, it's a $4 billion proposal, and it's only the medium to large corporations that can afford to raise the money to be involved in those kinds of projects.
Member for Calgary Northwest, followed by Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister of Career Development and Employment give us an update on the most current employment statistics in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the labour force statistics came out today from Statistics Canada. It's a survey of the provinces that give the trends and indications with regard to employment levels. Report that in actual terms, the unemployment rate in Alberta is 8.8%, and in adjusted terms, it's 8.1%. We're very pleased with the continued decline, Mr. Speaker. I should point out, too, that it is the first times in the last 6 years that Alberta has moved from into second place to Ontario in terms of the second lowest unemployment rate in this country. That is to say that we have 1,170,000 people working in Alberta in March, and that too is a new all-time record for the province of Alberta.
Supplementary to the minister, has there been any impact in the city of Calgary following the Olympics, and also has there been any change in the stats in Edmonton?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated last month at this time in discussions about the level of employment in Calgary vis-a-vis the Olympics, it's obvious that with the closing of that event, there is going to have some negative impact on the level of employment in Calgary. However, the strength of the economy in Alberta in the long term will dictate as to whether or not those dislocated individuals who were employed for the Olympic period will find alternate employment in the coming months. Alberta's unemployment, or Calgary's unemployment rate in any case, Mr. Speaker, is down 1.1% from this time last year. And I should say that Edmonton's is down 2.7% from this time last year. So and to say that there are 7,000 more people working in Edmonton than this time last month.
Second supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Affairs and Trade. Is this department taking any initiatives to follow up in the promotion of trade and industry and development as a result of the Olympic marketing process?
Mr. Speaker, there's important follow-up being undertaken by our department, the Department of Tourism, Department of Forestry and Technology, Research and Telecommunication, as a result of the many business visitors who were in Calgary during the Winter Olympics. And that follow-up is being undertaken on a direct basis with individual business people who visited Alberta Business House or were involved in Enterprise 88, which was a private sector endeavor by the business leaders of Calgary. And also, of course, I believe that the Deputy Premier has outlined a program to follow up by way of promotion of Alberta as a follow-up to the Olympics. So there is a very aggressive follow-up to the Olympics going on right now.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, also to the Minister of Economic Affairs and Trade. Has your department conducted any studies to determine the impact of the initiatives that this province have taken in northern Alberta in pulp, paper and heavy oils on the City of Edmonton as a supply and service industry?
Yes, Edmonton is well known as an excellent supplier of fabricated goods for major industrial projects. And in recent years, the city has suffered quite extensively as a result of a slowdown in industrial investment in not just northern Alberta, but throughout Western Canada. And as a result of major investment decisions that are being made now, that are to a great extent a result of aggressive policies by the province to diversify, the results are very positive in terms of the expansion of the fabricating capability and job creation in Edmonton and in northern Alberta.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Edmonton Highlands.
Yes, to the Minister of Career Development and Employment, it's nice to see that employment is down, but the situation is clearly not rosy for everyone. I wonder whether the government is making any study or paying any attention to how many of these employed are the working poor who have to resort to food banks and have other difficulties, and what is the government doing to look after their concerns?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member for Calgary-Buffalo brings forward an important point that irrespective of the fact that we have a record level of employment in Alberta, there still are people that are unemployed, and it is still our responsibility as a government to deal with them and to provide opportunities for them to move into the labor force. Economic initiatives by the private sector are first and foremost, and programs like the Employment Alternatives Program, which moved some 6,000 people from social assistance into the labor force to give them a chance at being productive in the economy, is a very important initiative, and we will continue in that direction, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Highlands.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Will the Career Development and Employment Minister now commit his government, seeing as how the unemployment rate is down, to raising the minimum wage immediately?
Mr. Speaker, I'd refer that question to the Minister of Labour.
Topic doesn't matter. Minimum wage being changed immediately. The matter's been referred. The chair recognizes Vegreville, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, then Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On two recent occasions, the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs has said in the House that he's not prepared to make representation to his kissing cousins in Ottawa about their plans to close post offices in rural Alberta, 180 post offices, because it's a federal responsibility. Now, if we overlook the Minister of Agriculture hiring Hugh Planche to make representation to federal politicians about a federal issue of grain transportation, or the Minister of Economic Development and Trade sending officials from his department to Canadian Transport Commission hearings to encourage them to abandon rail lines in Alberta and institute variable freight rates, I'd like to know if the Minister has now articulated what is going to be a new government policy of silence on federal issues that hurt ordinary Albertans.
My answer remains the same as I gave the other day, and to the honourable member for Vegreville and to the honourable member for Edmonton-Beverly. The postal services of this country are the responsibility of the federal government. It is, of course, a matter of concern to all Albertans, and they should take appropriate action in terms of expressing their concerns to their members of parliament.
Well, our members of parliament have no influence, and he knows that, but with respect, this government has routinely made representation to the government on issues like taxation, trade, agricultural assistance, the PGRT. Is the minister saying that he's being arbitrary and selective and that he's not prepared to stand up for rural Albertans on this issue?
Where there are matters of joint federal-provincial responsibilities, we of course take an active role. When it affects, as the PGRT did, specifically the interests of ownership interests of Alberta, where we took an active role in imposing the national energy program supported by the NDP and the Liberals. We certainly took an active interest, and we will continue to do that on behalf of Albertans. And where it is the responsibility solely of the federal government, they should be the people who are contacted by all Albertans who have concerns, not by this minister.
There is no more questions on the matter of the postal issue. On the postal... Thank you, gentlemen. The references were given the other day. So again, keep to the matter of the representation. The last part of the question wandered from that issue. Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs Act states that the minister is obliged by statute to conduct a continuing review of all policies in relation to the government of Alberta and the...
What's the question?
I'd like to know, given the fact that this minister seems to be willing to be selective in his choice of issues to make representation on behalf of Albertans, if he would now, if the Deputy Premier would now consider reducing his budget by half and calling it the Ministry of Interprovincial Government Affairs.
Final supplementary, Vegreville.
Final supplementary, then recognizing that that the closure of post offices in rural Alberta will have a serious impact on our communities, businesses and people. I'm wondering if the Minister of Economic Development has bothered to make any sort of investigation into just what the exact impact will be of this hurtful federal action on our rural communities in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, in discussions with a number of MLAs who are doing their job for their constituents, I'm well aware of their individual interventions with their MPs on this matter.
Here, here. Member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, I wonder if the Minister is prepared to assist MLAs in writing their own letters to federal members and federal ministers if they're unable to do it themselves, unlike some of us, maybe some of them over there.
Thank you.
Speaker, Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs is not really in the job of writing letters for members who, but if they do need assistance in learning what the responsibilities of our government are, as opposed to the responsibilities of the Government of Canada, need some help in taking them through Section 91 responsibilities, Section 92 responsibilities of the Constitution Act, and Section 93, and so on. Well, I guess we can give some assistance to honourable members who do not understand that there are divisions of responsibilities set out in the Constitution Act of Canada, and one of which is in Section 91 of the Constitution Act, solely a responsibility of the federal government, and I, as an individual Albertan, as an individual MLA, am certainly in discussions with my Member of Parliament, and that is where it should belong.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't sure I was going to get in this morning. Mr. Speaker, we've been treated in the last few weeks to a number of contrasting signals and activities in the social service arena. We've had the tantalizing remarks from the Deputy Premier about the mysterious social policy. Wait for it. And we have the food bank report telling what's really happening. We've got the native children's repatriation, the empty John Bosco Ranch, hungry children given family counseling, and we've had a ministerial announcement regarding food allocation increase of 13.5%. My question to the Minister of Social Services is, regarding this food allocation increase, who gets it, this princely amount that would come down to approximately $3.25 a week? Who's going to get it of social allowance recipients?
Mr. Speaker, all people who are on social allowance, and the amount that is available is according to the age and the needs of the individual.
Good question. According to need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I take it everybody gets some part of the increase, which probably will not be equal. Mr. Speaker, will the minister make public the rationale for the allocation about food and the information as to how it was developed?
Mr. Speaker, I would hope that the honourable member, having raised a family, would be well aware of the nutritional food groups that are necessary for, particularly for children and their growing needs, and would know that within those groups there are various foods available at varying prices. And it is choosing those groups and making sure that we have a reasonable selection available to families is how we arrive at that amount.
Well, we're not going to find out who develops it, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister now separate utility allocations from shelter allowances, a long time standing problem for individuals?
Mr. Speaker, I would reiterate once again that we believe that the amounts that have been made available to families are sufficient, but where there is anomalies, and there certainly can be in some parts of this province, those people who are recipients are certainly entitled to go to an appeal committee and have those anomalies and needs addressed.
Mr. Speaker, will the minister make damage deposits available to single employables so that they can find a place to live?
Mr. Speaker, it is our view that the amount that is available is sufficient.
Supplementary, Edmonton Calder? No, all three have gone. Honourable member. Thank you. Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister. Would the minister explain to this Assembly how she can argue that social allowance recipients don't know how to budget when rates are set in this province arbitrarily and do not reflect the true costs of rent, clothing, utilities, and food?
Mr. Speaker, I categorically disagree with the premise to the honourable member's question. It is interesting to note that there is obviously a very major difference in the approach by the official opposition and the government. We do have considerable faith in Albertans' ability to manage and know that at many times Albertans need the tools, and some of that's by way of education, in order to bring information to them. I note that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said that we don't want counselling, we want food. We believe children need 3 square meals a day and that families need some assistance in coming to that.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. I wonder if the minister can share with the Assembly any information that she may have that the present system of allowing social recipients money for food rather than the old system where they had food vouchers, if we could see that the new system is vastly superior and that we get proper food through it.
Mr. Speaker, it is fair to say that unfortunately we do have to recognize that there are some people who, regardless of assistance that's made available by way of information and counselling, will not spend money where it should be appropriately done. And in those cases, at times, the province, the department must intervene and pay directly to landlords or alternately provide vouchers. But by and large, Mr. Speaker, it is our view that given the responsibility to manage their money, that in fact the welfare recipients are doing just that.
Member for Edmonton Centre. Just by this. Sorry, honourable member. The chair, however, did recognize the member before the beeper went. Does the House give unanimous consent to deal with this issue that was raised by the member for Edmonton Centre? Opposed? Chair hears no. Orders of the day.